pressed her scaled palm against the cold metal of the viewport, watching the blue-white marble of Earth grow larger through the transport ship's reinforced glass. Her amber eyes, usually bright with the fierce determination of her people, now held only the hollow emptiness of someone who had lost everything. The ceremonial scars along her neck, marks of honor among the, felt like shameful brands now that she was cast out from her. The human colony transport New Horizon was nothing like the sleek bioships of her people. Everything here was angular, practical, built with function over the flowing, organic aesthetics that the prized. But then again, she was no longer. The Council of Elders had made that abundantly clear when they stripped her of her family name, her property, and her citizenship. First time seeing Earth. The voice belonged to a human male who had appeared beside her at the observation deck. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair and kind brown eyes that reminded her of the warm stones near her childhood home's hearth. Unlike many humans she had encountered in the neutral stations, he didn't seem repulsed or afraid of her reptilian appearance. Yes, replied in heavily accented Standard Galactic. I am, was of the now I am simply. The human extended his hand, and the gesture she had learned was a greeting among his species. James, and you're still whoever you choose to be, regardless of what anyone else says. She stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before tentatively grasping it. The warmth of human skin was startling against her cooler scales, but not unpleasant. You do not fear me. James laughed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within his chest. Should I? You look like someone who needs a friend, not someone I should fear. The simple kindness in his words nearly broke what remained of her composure. When was the last time anyone had offered her friendship without expecting something in return? I am exiled, she said quietly. Cast out from my people for refusing an arranged bonding that would have enslaved me to a male who viewed females as property. Then your people made a mistake, James said without hesitation, and their loss is humanity's gain. Over the remaining 3 days of the journey to Earth, James sought her out repeatedly. He shared meals with her when other passengers avoided her table, showed her human entertainment programs on his personal tablet, and listened without judgment as she told him about her world and the rigid caste system that had ultimately rejected her. They were an ancient species, proud of their traditions and their hierarchy. Females were expected to bond with males chosen by their families to bear offspring and to serve their household. Had been blessed with exceptional intelligence and had dreams of becoming a scientist, but such ambitions were forbidden to her gender. When her family arranged her bonding to a wealthy but cruel male who already had 3 wives he treated as slaves, she had done the unthinkable. She had refused. So you gave up everything for your freedom, James said as they sat in the transport's small recreation area on their final night before reaching Earth. I gave up everything and gained nothing, corrected. I am alone with no skills that translate to your human economy, no family, no home. The other species look at me as a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. The humans I have met before you treated me with polite distance. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those warm brown eyes. What if you didn't have to be alone? Something in his tone made her heart skip. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone was willing to offer you a partnership, a chance to build something new together? You speak of marriage, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I speak of choice, James replied. Something your people never gave you. I'm not asking you to be my property or to give up your dreams. I'm asking if you'd like to face an uncertain future together instead of alone. Stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden motives. Among her people, such an offer would come with conditions, with expectations of servitude and submission. But James had spent days treating her as an equal, listening to her opinions, respecting her intelligence. You would marry an exile, someone with nothing to offer. You're wrong about having nothing to offer, James said gently. You're brilliant, brave enough to sacrifice everything for your principles, and you see the universe from a perspective I could never imagine. I'd be honored if you'd consider being my partner. The word partner sent a thrill through her. Not wife, not servant, not property partner, equal. What would this partnership entail? She asked, trying to keep hope from creeping into her voice. We'd start with the legal requirements for a human marriage, which would give you citizenship and protection under Earth law. From there, we figure it out together. You mentioned wanting to be a scientist. Earth has some of the finest research institutions in the galaxy. Maybe we help you pursue that dream. And what do you gain from this arrangement? James smiled, and she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I gain a partner who challenges me to be better, who sees the universe through eyes that have experienced things I never could. I gain someone who chose freedom over comfort, truth over convenience. I'd be lucky to have you in my life. She closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill. No one had ever spoken to her as James did, as if her thoughts and dreams mattered. If I agree to this, what happens when you tire of me? When you realize that life with an alien brings more complications than rewards? Then we face those complications together, James said simply. Marriage isn't supposed to be easy, it's supposed to be worth it. The landing at New Geneva Spaceport was chaotic, filled with the sounds of dozens of languages and the bustle of beings from across the galaxy. Followed James through the immigration lines, her hearts, for the had too, hammering in her chest as they approached the human official. Purpose of visit? The officer asked, glancing up from his screen to take in reptilian features without reaction. Immigration, James replied, placing his hand on shoulder in a gesture of support. We're here to marry. The officer nodded and began entering information into his terminal. Congratulations! You'll need to complete the cultural compatibility course and waiting period, standard procedure for marriages. As they walked through the gleaming corridors of the spaceport, marveled at the diversity around her. Humans worked alongside dozens of alien species, all seemingly accepted as part of Earth society. Children of mixed species played together while their parents conducted business. It was nothing like the rigid segregation of her. James, she said as they reached the maglev station that would take them into the city, why did you really offer to marry me? He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Because in the 3 days we talked, you showed me more courage than I've seen in a lifetime. You walked away from everything you knew because you believed you deserved better. That kind of strength, it's rare. And maybe because I've been looking for someone who wouldn't just accept the life handed to them, but who would fight to build something better. The maglev train swept them through the Swiss countryside toward Geneva, past green hills dotted with solar collectors and wind farms. James pointed out landmarks and explained human history as they traveled, his enthusiasm infectious, but found herself studying him as much as the scenery. He had told her, specializing in cross-species physiology. His work had taken him to dozens of worlds, studying how different species adapted to various environments. It was work that required not just intelligence, but empathy, the ability to understand life forms radically different from himself. Where will we live? She asked as the city came into view. I have a small apartment near the university, James said. It's not much, but it has a spare room you can use as your own space while we get to know each other better. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we both choose. The apartment was indeed small, but it was clean and filled with books and specimens from James's research. He showed her to the spare room, which had a window overlooking a small garden where earth plants grew alongside specimens from other worlds. I know this is all happening very fast, James said as they stood in the doorway. We can take as much time as you need to feel comfortable. Looked around the room, her room, and felt something she hadn't experienced since her exile began, hope. On my world, marriages are ceremonies of ownership, she said quietly. The male declares his possession of the female before witnesses. Is it the same here? Human marriage is supposed to be a promise, James replied. A commitment to support each other through whatever comes. The ceremony is just making that promise public. And if I cannot bear human children, if the genetic differences are too great? James was quiet for a moment. Then we find other ways to build a family if that's what we want. Adoption, maybe, or we focus on the family we create together. Children aren't the only way to measure a successful partnership. That evening, as James prepared dinner in his small kitchen, stood on the balcony watching the sun set over Geneva. The city was alive with activity, humans and aliens moving through the streets together, pursuing their lives without the rigid hierarchies that had defined her existence. Her communicator chimed, and she saw a message from her sister, the first contact from her family since her exile. The council has decided that your actions bring shame to our entire bloodline, the message read. You are forbidden from ever claiming kinship with the Father has declared you dead to us. Deleted the message without responding. The family that had raised her, that she had loved despite their blindness to her dreams, had chosen their traditions over their daughter. But standing here on James's balcony, looking out at a world that had already shown her more acceptance than her own species, she felt something unexpected: relief. She was free to become whoever she chose to be. "Dinner's ready," James called from inside. She joined him at his small table, where he had prepared something he called pasta with vegetables from his garden. The flavors were unlike anything from her, but they were warm and comforting. "I received word from my family," she said as they ate. "They have officially disowned me." James paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "I'm sorry, that must be painful." "It is," she admitted, "but also liberating. I am truly free now to make my own choices." "And what do you choose?" She looked across the table at this human who had offered her partnership when she had nothing, who spoke to her as an equal when her own people had treated her as property. "I choose to marry you, James, if the offer still stands." His smile was radiant. "The offer stands, and I'm honored by your choice." They began the legal process the next morning. Earth's requirements for marriage were extensive: cultural compatibility courses, psychological evaluations, and a waiting period designed to ensure both parties understood what they were committing to. But rather than feeling burdensome, the process felt like an affirmation that their choice mattered, that the society they were joining took marriage seriously. The cultural compatibility course was taught by Dr., a human anthropologist who specialized in relationships. The classroom contained a dozen couples from various species combinations, humans paired with, and even another female who had come to Earth for similar reasons as. "Marriage between species isn't just about love," Doctor explained during their first session. "It's about building bridges between cultures, creating something new while honoring what each partner brings to the relationship." The coursework covered everything from communication differences to biological compatibility to legal protections. Learned that Earth had extensive anti-discrimination laws protecting families, that their children would be full citizens regardless of their genetic heritage, and that domestic violence laws applied equally to all species. But the most valuable part of the course was the time she spent talking with James about their expectations and dreams. They discussed everything from career goals to household responsibilities to how they would handle conflicts. "Among my people, disagreements are settled by the male making a decree," explained during one of their evening discussions. "The female's role is to accept and comply." "That sounds exhausting for everyone involved," James said. "I'd rather figure out solutions together than have to make all the decisions alone." These conversations revealed the depth of James's character in ways that impressed her daily. He was thoughtful, willing to admit when he was wrong, and genuinely interested in her perspectives. When she expressed interest in pursuing the study of plant life from other worlds, he immediately began researching programs at local universities. "The Geneva Institute has an excellent department," he said one evening, showing her information on his tablet. "They even have exchange programs with non-human universities." "You would not mind if I spent years studying, if my career required travel to other worlds." "I fell in love with your mind before anything else," James said gently. "I want to see you use it." The phrase "fell in love" stopped her cold. Love was not something that had been part of her understanding of marriage. Among the marriage was about lineage, property, and reproduction. Love was a luxury that might develop over time but was never the foundation. "You love me?" she asked quietly. James nodded, his expression serious. "I do. I love your courage, your intelligence, the way you see beauty in things others overlook. I love that you chose to fight for your freedom rather than accept a comfortable prison. Is that something you can accept?" Thought about the growing warmth she felt when James smiled, the way her hearts raced when he touched her hand, the security she felt in his presence. Among her people, such feelings were considered weakness, but here they were being offered as gifts. "I believe I love you too," she said, the words feeling foreign but right on her tongue. "Though I am still learning what that means. We'll figure it out together." The waiting period passed quickly, filled with preparation for their new life together. James helped her navigate Earth's educational system, accompanying her to the university to meet with advisors and tour laboratories. The department was everything she had dreamed of: vast greenhouses filled with plant life from across the galaxy, research equipment that made her training look primitive, and professors who were eager to discuss her ideas. Dr. Sarah, the department head, was particularly encouraging. Your perspective as a would be invaluable here, she said during their meeting. Your people's biomanipulation techniques are legendary, but we've never had anyone who could explain the underlying principles. I was never allowed to study them formally on my, admitted. Females were forbidden from the sciences. Well, you're not on your anymore, Doctor said with a smile. And we judge students by their ability, not their gender or species. The night before their wedding ceremony, stood in her room looking at the simple white dress James had helped her choose. On her, brides wore elaborate biosilk gowns that took months to grow, decorated with living jewels that responded to the wearer's emotions. This human dress was plain by comparison, but it was hers by choice, not tradition. James knocked softly on her door. "Can I come in?" She opened the door to find him holding a small wrapped package. "A pre-wedding gift," he said. "I know your people have different customs, but this is something from mine." Inside the wrapping was a small silver pendant shaped like a double helix, the structure of DNA, the building block of life. But this one was modified, with sections that clearly represented non-human genetic markers. "It's to represent what we're building together," James explained. "Something new that combines the best of both our heritage." Fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her scaled skin. "On my world, a bride receives nothing but instructions on how to serve her new household. On Earth, she receives promises that she'll never have to serve anyone but herself." Their wedding ceremony took place in the small chapel at Geneva University, with Doctor officiating and a handful of James's colleagues serving as witnesses. The female from their compatibility course had offered to stand as witness, the first time another of her species had acknowledged her since her exile. The ceremony was simple by human standards, but too, every word felt revolutionary. Instead of vows of obedience and submission, she found herself promising partnership and support. Instead of declaring her property transfer from father to husband, James pledged to honor her independence and dreams. "Do you take James as your partner in marriage, to support and be supported by him in equality and love?" "I do," she said, the words feeling like a key turning in a lock that had held her captive her entire life. When James kissed her to seal their union, felt something she had never experienced before, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with someone who valued her for everything her own people had tried to suppress. The reception was small but joyous, held in the university's botanical garden among the alien plants that would soon become her field of study. As she watched James laugh with his colleagues, saw the way they welcomed her into their circle without reservation, realized that she had gained far more than a husband. She had gained a future of her own choosing. 2 years had passed since marriage to James, and the modest apartment in Geneva had transformed into something that felt like home. The walls were now lined with specimens from both their research projects, James's samples sharing space with his growing collection of alien flora. Her scales had developed a subtle luminescence that appeared when she was happy, something James had noticed with delight during their first anniversary celebration. The morning sun streamed through their bedroom window as prepared for what would be one of the most important days of her academic career. Today, she would defend her master's thesis in a groundbreaking study on the symbiotic relationships between biocrops and their native soil microorganisms. "Nervous?" James asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. He had taken the day off from his own research to attend her defense. "Terrified," admitted, running her scaled fingers through the auburn hair she had decided to grow after learning that human genetics allowed for such variety in appearance. The combination of her natural scales and the flowing hair created a striking effect that had become something of a signature look on campus. "Doctor has a nice ring to it," James said, using the name she had chosen to take. The decision to adopt his surname had been entirely hers, a symbolic severing of her last connection to a people who had rejected her. Her communicator chimed with a message from Doctor, ready to change forever. The defense was scheduled for the main lecture hall, and as they arrived at the university, was surprised to see the crowd gathering outside. Word of her research had spread throughout the scientific community. She was the first to formally study their own species' agricultural techniques from an academic perspective, bringing insights that had been jealously guarded by her people for. "Professor," called a young human student as they walked across campus. The title still sent a thrill through, She had been offered a teaching position contingent on completing her defense today. The lecture hall was packed beyond capacity, with beings from dozens of species in attendance. Representatives from agricultural colonies across the galaxy had come to hear her findings, which promised to revolutionize food production on marginal worlds. Doctor introduced her with evident pride. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from someone who has bridged two worlds of knowledge, brings both the intuitive understanding of bioagriculture and the rigorous analytical framework of human scientific method. Took the podium looking out at the sea of faces, human, and even a few who had come despite the scandal her exile had caused among their people. She spotted James in the front row, his encouraging smile giving her strength. 2 years ago, I was told that my people's agricultural methods were primitive intuition, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. Today, I present evidence that they represent one of the most sophisticated ecosystem management systems in the galaxy. Her presentation unfolded like a revelation. Using human analytical tools, she had decoded the complex chemical and biological interactions that made biocrops so successful. What her people had dismissed as simple tradition was actually a masterpiece of symbiotic engineering that had evolved over thousands of years. The implications were staggering. By understanding the principles behind agriculture, humans and other species could adapt these techniques to their own worlds, potentially ending food scarcity on dozens of colonies. During the question period, Dr. Orr, one of the observers, stood up, recognized him as a member of the Agricultural Guild, one of the most conservative factions on her. "Young female," he said in the traditional tone of dismissal, "you speak of our sacred methods as if they were mere chemistry. Do you not understand that you violate the sanctity of our ancestors' wisdom?" The hall fell silent. This was the confrontation had both dreaded and expected. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "Honored elder," she replied informal, then switched to standard galactic so the entire audience could understand. "I speak of our ancestors' wisdom with the reverence it deserves, but reverence without understanding is merely superstition. Our ancestors were brilliant scientists who developed these techniques through careful observation and experimentation. To honor them properly, we must understand their achievements, not simply repeat their actions blindly." Dr. Orr's crest flared with anger. "You were exiled for your arrogance, female. Your people rejected you." "My people rejected me for refusing to be property," replied calmly. "But they cannot reject the truth of science. The soil analyses don't care about our politics, elder. The molecular structures don't change based on our prejudices." The room buzzed with tension as others in the audience shifted uncomfortably. This public challenge to traditional authority was unprecedented. James half rose from his seat, ready to intervene if needed, but caught his eye and shook her head slightly. This was her battle to fight. "Furthermore," she continued, "my research shows that our traditional methods are failing. Crop yields on them have declined by 30% over the past century because we're following the rituals without understanding the science. Climate change has altered the soil chemistry, but we continue to use the same biocrops our ancestors developed for different conditions." Dr. Orr sputtered, but Doctor stepped forward. "Do you have data to support this claim, Doctor?" "I do." Activated the holographic display, showing atmospheric and soil data that she had painstakingly gathered from public scientific databases. "If we don't adapt our techniques to current conditions, the faces agricultural collapse within 50 years. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Dr. Ra, another scientist, stood up. "How would you propose to save our world, exile?" "The same way humanity saved Earth after their climate disasters," replied. "Through science, cooperation, and the willingness to change when change is needed. We can modify our biocrops to work with current soil conditions. We can develop new symbiotic relationships, but only if we're willing to admit that tradition without adaptation is suicide." The Defense Committee's deliberation was brief. When they returned, Doctor wore a broad smile. "It is my privilege to award the degree of Master of Science into Doctor, with highest honors. Your thesis has been accepted for immediate publication in the Journal of Galactic Agriculture." The applause was thunderous but barely heard it. She was watching the delegation as they filed out. Some left in obvious anger, but others lingered, their expressions thoughtful. Change would come slowly to her people, but it would come. After the ceremony, as colleagues and friends gathered for the traditional celebration, found herself in conversation with Dr. Ra. "Your exile was a loss for our people," the older female said quietly. "I have reviewed your research. It is compelling." "Science knows no exile," replied. "If my work can help prevent the disaster I've predicted, then my people are welcome to use it. The Agricultural Guild will resist change. Then perhaps it's time for new voices in the guild." Dr. Ra studied her for a long moment. "Would you consider returning to Or as a scientific advisor?" The question hit like a physical blow. Return to the world that had cast her out, face the family that had declared her dead. "I would need to discuss it with my husband," she said finally. James appeared at her elbow as if summoned. "Discuss what with your husband?" Dr. Ra bowed formally to James. "I have extended an invitation for your wife to return to or as a consulting scientist. Her work may be crucial to preventing an agricultural disaster." James looked at, reading the conflict in her expression. "What do you want to do?" It was such a purely human question, not what she should do or what tradition demanded, but what she wanted. Even after 2 years of marriage, the freedom to choose still sometimes overwhelmed her. "I want to help my people," she said slowly. "But I won't go alone, and I won't go as a supplicant begging for acceptance. If I return to Or, it will be as doctor with my husband at my side and my credentials recognized." Dr. Ra's crest rose in surprise. "You would bring a human to the—" "I would bring my partner," corrected. "The man who supported my dreams when my own people tried to crush them. If or wants my help, they accept my family." The negotiations took 3 months. Research had created ripple effects throughout the scientific community, with agricultural worlds across the galaxy requesting consultation on applying her techniques. The government found itself in the uncomfortable position of needing the expertise of someone they had exiled. During those months, and James prepared for what would be either a triumphant return or a diplomatic disaster. James underwent intensive cultural training, learning customs and language, published additional papers that further demonstrated the urgency of agricultural reform on the— The breakthrough came when a preliminary soil analysis confirmed predictions. Crop yields on or dropped another 15% in a single growing season, causing food shortages in several regions. Faced with potential famine, even the most conservative factions of society began to reconsider their positions. The invitation, when it finally came, was grudging but official. Doctor and her research team, which included James, were requested to advise the Agricultural Guild on emergency crop modifications. Their departure from Earth was bittersweet. Geneva had become home in a way that Or never had. Doctor threw them a farewell party at the university, and colleagues from across the academic community came to wish them well. "You're going to revolutionize an entire world," Doctor said as they embraced goodbye. "But more than that, you're going to show them what they threw away when they exiled you." The journey to Or took 2 weeks aboard a human diplomatic vessel. James spent the time studying culture and biology, preparing for his role as the first human to set foot on the— Found herself nervous in ways she hadn't expected. How much had changed in the 4 years since her exile? Would her family acknowledge her existence, or would they continue to treat her as dead? As their ship entered the Or system, pressed her face to the viewport much as she had when first approaching Earth. The sight of her twin suns and triple moons stirred emotions she had tried to suppress. This was still the world of her birth, the landscape of her childhood dreams. The landing at the primary spaceport was formal and tense. A delegation of Agricultural Guild officials waited for them, along with a smaller group that recognized with a shock. Her sister stood among the observers, her expression unreadable. Dr. Or, the same elder who had challenged her during her thesis defense, stepped forward as they disembarked. "Doctor," he said stiffly, "the Guild acknowledges your credentials and accepts your assistance in this crisis." "Thank you for your welcome," replied formally. "May I present my research partner, Dr. James?" James stepped forward and executed a perfect bow of respectful greeting. "I am honored to visit your world and assist in any way possible." The reaction was mixed. Some of the officials seemed impressed by James's cultural preparation, while others barely concealed their distaste at a human presence on their sacred soil. But none could argue with the growing crisis that had brought them to this point. Their transport to the research facilities took them through the capital, and watched James's face as he took in the flowing bioarchitecture of her people. Buildings that grew rather than being built, living walls that adjusted their permeability based on weather conditions, transportation systems that were essentially domesticated creatures. It was as alien to him as Earth's angular construction had once been to her. "It's beautiful," James said quietly, speaking in. "Your people are extraordinary artists." Despite herself, felt a surge of pride. Whatever else had happened, this was still the world that had shaped her aesthetic sense, that had taught her to see beauty in the marriage of function and form. Their first stop was the Agricultural Research Center, where was reunited with laboratories she had dreamed of accessing as a young female. Now she walked through them as an honored guest, her human husband at her side, carrying credentials that even the most conservative elders couldn't dismiss. The soil samples they were shown confirmed her worst fears. The symbiotic relationships that had sustained agriculture were breaking down. Chemical changes in the atmosphere, caused by industrial development over the past century, had altered soil composition in ways that the traditional biocrops couldn't adapt to quickly enough. "How long do we have?" asked Dr. L., the current head of the Agricultural Guild. 6 months, maybe less, replied after reviewing the data. "If the current decline continues, you'll lose another 30% of your crop yield in the next growing season. After that, you're looking at genuine famine." The room fell silent. These were proud beings who had never faced such a fundamental threat to their survival. "What do you recommend?" Dr. L asked. "We need to develop modified biocrops that can work with the changed soil chemistry," said. "It's possible. I've done preliminary work on Earth using genetic samples I brought with me, but it will require abandoning some traditional varieties in favor of adapted ones." "Abandon the sacred crops?" Dr. Orr's crest flared. "Impossible." "The sacred crops are dying," James said quietly, speaking for the first time since their arrival. "Doctor isn't suggesting you abandon your traditions, but adapt them to save your people." The debate that followed was heated, conducted in rapid that James couldn't follow but whose emotional undertones were clear. Finally, Dr. L called for order. "Doctor, how long would this adaptation process take?" "Working around the clock with full guild resources, 3 months to develop viable prototypes, another month for testing and refinement. We could have new biocrops ready for the next planting season." "And the success rate?" "Based on my preliminary research, 90% probability of preventing famine, 60% chance of actually improving yields over current conditions." Dr. L looked around the room at his colleagues. "We will consider your proposal and provide an answer tomorrow." As they were escorted to their guest quarters, a comfortable biostructure near the research center finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. She had returned to her not as a penitent exile, but as a scientist whose expertise was desperately needed. Their quarters included separate sleeping areas connected by a common space, a consideration for their marital status that showed more cultural sensitivity than had expected. As they settled in for the evening, James joined her on the balcony overlooking the capital city. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Overwhelmed," she admitted. "Part of me wants to help my people, but part of me is still angry that it took a crisis to make them acknowledge my worth." "You don't owe them anything, you know," James said gently. "We could leave tomorrow if this becomes too difficult." Leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I know, but if I can prevent people from starving, how can I not try?" Their contemplation was interrupted by a soft chime at the entrance. James went to answer it and returned with a visitor who made hearts skip. Stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. She was older than remembered, with new scarring on her neck that indicated she had risen in status since their last meeting. "Sister," said formally, "may I enter?" Of course, stood unsure of the protocol. Were they still sisters? Did her exile void that relationship? Entered and bowed formally to James. "You must be the human who married my sister. I am of the scientific caste." James replied, returning the bow. "I'm honored to meet you." Turned back to, "I have come to apologize for our family's actions during your exile. Your research has proven that you were right to pursue science, even against tradition." "You don't need to." "I do," interrupted. "Father forbade any of us from contacting you, said you had brought shame on our lineage. but watching your presentation at the university, seeing how the scientific community respects your work. I realized we were the ones who brought shame on ourselves. Felt tears threatening. How is the family? Struggling with the knowledge that they cast out a daughter who might save our world, said bluntly. Mother has watched every recording of your speeches. Father is proud but too stubborn to admit his mistake. And you? I have been working to change the laws that prevented you from pursuing your education in the first place, replied. Young females should have the same opportunities as males. Your success has given strength to that movement. James discreetly to the sleeping area, giving the sisters privacy for their reunion. They talked long into the night, bridging 4 years of separation with shared memories and new understanding. The next morning brought news that the Agricultural Guild had voted to accept's proposal. Work would begin immediately on developing adapted biocrops, but the victory came with a condition that makes blood run cold. The Guild insists that this work be conducted under traditional supervision, Dr. L explained. Doctor or will oversee all modifications to ensure they remain within acceptable cultural parameters. That's impossible, protested. Scientific research can't be conducted under religious restrictions. Either you trust my methods or you don't. This is the compromise that allows your work to proceed at all, Dr. L said. Dr. Or has agreed to be flexible in his interpretations. James squeezed her hand under the table. We work with what we have, he said quietly. The next months were the most challenging of his professional life. Working under Dr. Or's suspicious supervision, she and James began the delicate process of modifying traditional biocrops to function with altered soil chemistry. Every change had to be justified not just scientifically, but culturally, ensuring that the new varieties maintained the symbolic and nutritional properties of their predecessors. James proved invaluable as a mediator between scientific necessity and cultural sensitivity. His outsider perspective allowed him to suggest compromises that neither nor Dr. Or could see, bridging the gap between innovation and tradition. Slowly, grudgingly, Dr. Or began to understand the depth of knowledge and the respect she showed for traditions even while adapting them. The breakthrough came when the first modified biocrop not only survived in test plots, but actually improved soil quality. The ancestors would be proud, Dr. Or admitted after reviewing the data. You have honored their wisdom while saving our people. As news of their success spread, found herself in an unprecedented position. The exile had become the savior, the rejected daughter who had returned to rescue her people. Invitations poured in from across or society, including one that meant more to her than all the others combined. Her father, the male who had declared her dead to preserve family honor, requested a private meeting. The meeting with her father was arranged for the family estate, the bio-structured mansion where had spent her childhood dreaming of a future her society insisted she could never have. As their transport approached the familiar flowing architecture that seemed to grow from the hillside itself, felt her hearts racing with emotions she had tried to bury for years. James sat beside her, studying her face with concern. In the 6 months they had been on, or he had watched her transform from an exile, proving her worth to a respected scientist, changing an entire world. But this reunion would test her in ways that science could not prepare for. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked for the 3rd time. I need to, replied, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. Not for him, but for myself. I need to close this chapter properly. The estate grounds were as beautiful as she remembered. Vast gardens where food crops grew in artistic arrangements, biopaths that adjusted their lighting based on the time of day, and the great house itself that had been shaped over generations to reflect the family's rising status in society. Her father waited for them in his study. He had aged considerably in the 4 years since her exile, his scales dulled with stress and his crest showing the silver of advanced years. When entered with James at her side, the old male's expression cycled through a complex series of emotions: pain, pride, regret, and something that might have been hope. My daughter, he said, the words seeming to catch in his throat. Father maintained formal posture, though every instinct screamed at her to either flee or collapse into tears. Thank you for agreeing to see me. His eyes moved to James, taking in the alien features with a mixture of curiosity and unease. This is the human you bonded with. This is my husband, Dr. James, corrected, emphasizing the title that her father would understand represented achievement and status. James executed a perfect formal bow. "Honored elder, I am grateful for your hospitality to a stranger." "You are not a stranger," said after a moment. "You are family." The admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. They sat in the traditional circle arrangement, with James facing her father across the low table that held the ceremonial cup of reconciliation, though no one reached for it yet. "I have followed your work," said directly to the reports from the Agricultural Guild, the data from your research. You have achieved something remarkable. "I have done what I always intended to do," replied evenly. "Practice science." "Yes," her father's crest lowered in what she recognized as shame. "I have spent many hours in contemplation since your exile. I believed I was protecting our family's honor by rejecting a daughter who refused her proper role. Instead, I rejected a daughter who was destined to save our entire species." The pain in his voice was real, but found herself unmoved. "Your regret doesn't erase 4 years of believing I was dead, father. It doesn't undo telling the entire family that I never existed." "No, it does not," reached across the table and lifted the reconciliation cup, holding it in both hands as tradition demanded. "I cannot undo my failures as a father. I can only acknowledge them and ask if there is any possibility of redemption." The gesture was significant. By offering the cup, her father was formally admitting fault and requesting forgiveness. It was more than she had ever expected from him. But James's presence reminded her of how much she had grown beyond the need for her family's approval. "I forgive you, father," she said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I am not the daughter you cast out. That person died when she left, or I am Doctor now, a scientist, a partner to my husband, and a citizen of Earth. That is who I choose to be." Nodded slowly. "And that is who I am proud of, even if I have no right to claim that pride." "You don't," agreed, but her voice had lost its hardness. "But you can earn the right to know her." They spent the afternoon talking, not as father and disobedient daughter, but as two adults who had made different choices and were now trying to understand each other. Was fascinated by Earth's culture and James's research, asking detailed questions about their life together. "You are truly equals?" he asked, the concept still foreign to his traditional mindset. "Completely," James replied. "Makes her own decisions about her career, her research, her life. I support her choices because I respect her judgment." "And when you disagree?" "We discuss it until we find a solution we can both accept," said. "Or we agree to disagree and respect each other's positions." Shook his head in wonder. "Such a marriage would be considered chaos among our people." "Such a marriage has made me happier than I ever thought possible," replied. As evening approached, more family members began arriving for what had turned into an impromptu reunion. Came with her own, a progressive male who worked in diplomacy. His younger brother, who had been barely adult when she left, now held a position in the scientific caste and spoke knowledgeably about her research. The gathering was awkward at first, with family members unsure how to interact with the sister they had been taught to mourn. But James's easy manner and genuine interest in culture helped break the tension. By the time the evening meal was served, the conversation had evolved into something approaching normalcy. "Tell us about Earth's marriage customs," urged Ha, his youngest sister who had always been fascinated by other worlds. James and took turns explaining human relationships, the concept of dating, the freedom to choose one's own partner, the legal protections for individual rights within marriage. The family listened with expressions ranging from curiosity to shock. "And human females can truly pursue any career they choose?" asked. "Any career they're qualified for," James confirmed. "Gender is never a barrier to education or employment." "How do you ensure proper family structure without traditional roles?" asked, genuinely trying to understand. "We define family by choice and commitment rather than by rigid hierarchy," explained. "James and I support each other's goals, share household responsibilities, and make decisions together. It requires more communication than traditional arrangements, but it's much more satisfying." The evening's breakthrough came when Ha asked to speak with privately. They walked out to the bio garden where had spent countless childhood hours dreaming of impossible futures. "I'm scheduled to be bonded next season," Ha said without preamble, "to Al of the Merchant Caste." "Congratulations," said carefully, sensing underlying conflict. "I don't want to," Ha burst out. I want to study at the university. I want to build bridges between worlds, not spend my life managing someone else's household. But father says the family's honor requires this alliance. Felt a familiar rage building. What do you want me to say, Ha? I want you to tell me it's possible to choose another path. I want to know that refusing won't destroy my entire life. Looking at her sister's desperate face, saw herself at that age, brilliant, ambitious, and trapped by expectations that valued her reproductive potential over her intellectual gifts. The pain of her own exile was still fresh enough that she wanted to protect Ha from experiencing it. It's possible, she said quietly. But it's not easy. You could lose everything familiar, everyone you love. You'll face discrimination, loneliness, and the constant need to prove yourself worthy of the choice you made. But you survived it. I did more than survive. I built a life I love with a partner who respects me as an equal, but only because I was willing to sacrifice everything else for that freedom. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the bioluminescent flowers respond to the evening breeze. Will you help me apply to universities off-world? Ha asked finally. The request hit like a physical blow. Her sister was asking her to help create another exile, another family crisis. But looking at Ha's face, she saw the same desperate determination that had driven her own choices years ago. Yes, she said, but we do this properly. You'll apply to schools, get accepted on your own merit, and present it to the family as a, if you're going to rebel, do it successfully. When they returned to the house, they found James deep in conversation with about the economic implications of the agricultural reforms. Her father was actually listening, treating James's opinions as worthy of serious consideration. Your human husband is quite insightful, murmured as she joined. Father has never taken advice from an outsider before. James has a gift for making people feel heard, replied, watching her husband explain something with animated gestures that made her father's crest rise with interest. The evening ended with something unprecedented in family tradition, formally invited them to consider the family home as always open to them. Not as a prodigal daughter returning in shame, but as an honored family member bringing her home. The next morning brought news that would test everything they had built. Dr. L arrived at their quarters with an urgent message from the High Council of Or. The success of your agricultural reforms has reached the attention of the Council of Worlds, he explained, his expression grave. They are requesting a full presentation on your methods. This could revolutionize agriculture on dozens of worlds. That's wonderful news, said, though she sensed there was more. The presentation must be given on Prime in 3 weeks, before the full council, including representatives from every major species. James whistled softly. The Council of Worlds was the closest thing the galaxy had to a unified government, mediating disputes between species and coordinating responses to galaxy-wide threats. A presentation before them represented the highest level of scientific recognition possible. There's one more thing, Dr. L continued. The High Council of Or wishes to formally reinstate your citizenship and offer you the position of Chief Agricultural Scientist. You would return home in triumph with full honors. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Everything she had lost through exile was being offered back, along with a position of prestige her younger self could never have imagined achieving. She would be one of the most powerful scientists on, or able to shape policy for generations to come. What about James? She asked immediately. He would be granted permanent resident status and a position at the university, Dr. L replied. The High Council recognizes that you are a partnership. Looked at James, seeing the careful neutrality in his expression. He was leaving the choice entirely to her, as he always did. But she could read the subtle signs of his feelings, the slight tension around his eyes that indicated stress, the way his hands remained carefully still when he was fighting emotion. May we have time to discuss this? Of course, but we need an answer before you leave for Prime. After Dr. L left, and James walked in silence to their private garden space. The question between them was enormous, not just where to live, but who they wanted to be as a couple. You want to stay on Earth, said finally. I want you to be happy, James replied. If that means building a new life here, I'm willing to try. That's not what I asked. James was quiet for a long moment, watching the alien flowers that had been genetically modified to thrive in Or soil. Earth feels like home to me in a way that nowhere else has, he admitted. My research, my colleagues, the life we built together, it's all there. But home is where you are. If you need to be here, then this is where I need to be too. And if I asked you to give up everything you've built for my dream of acceptance from a people who rejected me, then I'd ask if that's really what you want, or if it's what you think you should want. The question cut to the heart of her conflict. What did she actually want? The vindication of returning home in triumph, the security of belonging to her own species again, or the freedom to continue building the life she had chosen. She thought about their apartment in Geneva, filled with specimens from both their research projects. She remembered the excitement of her thesis defense, the pride in James's eyes when she received her degree, the colleagues who had become friends. She thought about Doctor's program, where she was developing new research that would help dozens of species. And she thought about Ha, her youngest sister, who needed to see that there were alternatives to the path their society laid out for females. I know what I want, she said finally. The presentation at Prime was a triumph that exceeded even their highest expectations. Stood before representatives of 43 species, explaining how the principles of bioagriculture could be adapted to solve food production problems across the galaxy. The response was overwhelming. 13 worlds immediately requested consultation on implementing her techniques. James sat in the audience section reserved for research partners, wearing the formal dress uniform of Earth's scientific diplomatic corps. The sight of him there, representing not just her personal support but humanity's backing of her work, filled with pride. When the presentation ended, the applause was thunderous. But the real victory came afterward, when Dr. of Vulcan approached them with an offer that represented the pinnacle of galactic scientific achievement. Doctor, the Council of Worlds would like to offer you the position of Director of Agricultural Sciences, the Vulcan said, with characteristic directness. You would oversee food production research for the entire galaxy, with unlimited resources and the authority to implement solutions wherever they are needed. The offer was staggering. It represented not just personal success, but the chance to prevent famine and suffering on dozens of worlds. And it came with the understanding that she would work as an equal partner with James, who would be offered a corresponding position in xenobiology. Where would this position be based? James asked. You would travel as needed, but your primary residence could be wherever you choose. Earth, Prime, even, or if you prefer. That evening, as they celebrated with colleagues from a dozen worlds, pulled James aside to a quiet balcony overlooking the capital. So, he said with a smile, Director of Agricultural Sciences for the entire galaxy. Not bad for someone who was exiled 4 years ago. Not bad for a partnership that started with a marriage of convenience, replied, leaning against his shoulder. Is that what it was, convenient? She looked up at him, this human who had offered her partnership when she had nothing, who had supported her dreams when her own people tried to crush them, who had become her anchor in a universe that often seemed hostile to those who dared to choose their own path. It was salvation, she said quietly. You offered me salvation when I had lost everything else. And what do you want to do with this salvation? Thought about the choice before them. They could return to Or, where she would be honored and respected, but always fighting against traditions that valued conformity over innovation. They could stay on Earth, continuing their individual research in the supportive environment that had nurtured their careers. Or they could accept the council position and spend their lives traveling between worlds, solving problems and building bridges between species. I want to save other worlds the way you saved me, she said finally. I want to take everything I learned about choosing freedom over security and help species that are facing the same challenges or faced. Even if it means we never really have a home base again. Home isn't a place, said, taking his hand. It's a choice, and I choose you wherever that takes us. The next morning, they sent their acceptance to the Council of Worlds and began planning their new life as roving scientists. But first, they had one more stop to make. Their return to Or was different this time, not as exiles seeking redemption, but as equals offering partnership. The High Council's invitation to return as chief agricultural scientist was politely but firmly declined. Instead, they proposed something unprecedented, a permanent cultural and scientific exchange program between Or and other worlds. Young females would study off-world and return with new perspectives, explained to the assembled Council of Elders. Males would learn to work with partners instead of ruling over subordinates, or would become a bridge between traditional wisdom and innovative thinking. The debate was fierce, but the agricultural crisis had already begun changing attitudes. The success of reforms had proven that traditional methods needed modern understanding to survive. Slowly, grudgingly, the council voted to approve the exchange program. The personal victory came when Ha was selected as one of the first participants, earning acceptance to the program at Geneva University. Watching her sister prepare for the same journey that had once seemed like exile, felt the circle of her life closing in a way she had never expected. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Ha the night before her departure. "Terrified but sure," Ha replied. "You showed me it was possible, now I have to find my own path." "Remember, you're not running away from anything. You're running towards something better." The farewell at the spaceport was emotional in ways that would have been unthinkable during exile. Embraced both his daughters, offering blessings for their journeys. Presented them with a biosculpture that would grow and adapt to whatever environment they placed it in, a living reminder of home that could thrive anywhere. But the most meaningful goodbye came from or the conservative elder who had once challenged her right to study her own people's traditions. "You have taught us that honoring our ancestors means understanding their wisdom, not blindly repeating their actions," he said as he pressed a data crystal into her hands. "This contains our most sacred agricultural texts. I trust you to share them with the galaxy in ways that honor their spirit if not their letter." As their ship lifted off from, or for what might be the last time, and James stood together at the viewport watching the world shrink below them. She was leaving again, but not as an exile this time. She was leaving as someone who had found her place in the universe and was ready to help others find theirs. "Any regrets?" James asked as they entered hyperspace. Thought about the life she might have had, comfortable, traditional, constrained by expectations that would have slowly killed everything vital about her spirit. Then she thought about the life she had chosen, uncertain, challenging, but filled with the freedom to become whoever she was meant to be. "None," she said, and meant it completely. Their first assignment as directors of agricultural sciences took them to New Terra, a human colony world struggling with crop failures in their modified soil. Then to the mining stations, where they developed hydroponic systems that could function in zero gravity. After that came the home systems, where they introduced modified earth grains that could grow in their methane-rich atmosphere. Each world brought new challenges, new species to understand, new problems to solve. But they also brought opportunities to do what had always dreamed of, using science to make life better for beings across the galaxy. Years passed in a blur of research, travel, and discovery. They developed a reputation as the team that could solve impossible agricultural problems, the human partnership that bridged species, barriers through science, and mutual respect. Young scientists from dozens of worlds applied to work with them, drawn by their example of what could be achieved through collaboration. On their 5th anniversary, they found themselves on Earth for a rare break between assignments. Walking through the Geneva Botanical Gardens where they had held their wedding reception, reflected on how much had changed since that nervous young exile had first met a kind human on a transport ship. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" she asked as they sat among the alien plants that had become her specialty. "Every day," James admitted. "I think about that scared young woman who was brave enough to give up everything for her freedom, and I wonder if I would have been that courageous." "You were courageous enough to offer partnership to someone with nothing to give in return." "You had everything to give," James corrected. "You just didn't know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching students from a dozen species tend to plants from across the galaxy. This was what they had built together, not just a marriage, but a model for how different beings could support each other while remaining true to themselves. His communicator chimed with a message from the Council of Worlds. Another crisis, another world in need of their expertise. She showed the message to James, who smiled and nodded. "Ready for the next adventure, Director." "Always, Director." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for another world, another challenge, another chance to prove that cooperation could overcome any obstacle, felt the same sense of purpose that had driven her to refuse an arranged marriage all those years ago. She had left or with nothing but her principles and her dreams. She had found salvation in a human marriage that offered her partnership instead of ownership, support instead of control, love instead of duty. And together, they had built something that neither could have achieved alone, a life dedicated to proving that understanding and respect could bridge any divide. The young exile who had once pressed her face against a viewport, watching Earth grow larger with desperate hope, had become someone who helped entire worlds reach for better futures. And the human who had offered friendship to a stranger had become her partner in changing the galaxy, one solved problem at a time. Their marriage had saved her from a life of servitude and given him a companion who challenged him to see the universe through different eyes. But more than that, it had become proof that when beings chose to support each other's growth instead of limiting it, they could achieve things that seemed impossible. As their ship lifted off from Earth toward their next assignment, took James's hand and smiled at the uncertainty ahead. She had learned that the best adventures began not with security, but with the courage to choose an unknown future with someone who believed in your potential to shape it. She had left or with nothing and sought salvation in a human marriage. What she found was something far better, a partnership that let her save herself while helping to save the galaxy in the process.